Kate was tired of life in the big city. The constant noise, the crowds, and the feeling of running endlessly without knowing where she was going had worn her down. She decided to move to a small town where everything seemed frozen in time. When she saw the old two-story house with its sagging porch, peeling paint on the windows, but a charming garden and a view of the forest, she immediately knew this was what she needed. The house was surprisingly cheap. The realtor didn't hide the fact that it had been vacant for a long time but assured her that this was nothing unusual. In small towns, houses like this often stand empty for years. Kate wasn't deterred. She bought the house and soon moved in, anticipating a peaceful life. Everything was perfect. During the day, sunlight flooded the rooms through large windows, and in the evenings, Kate enjoyed the coziness of sitting with a book by the fireplace. On her first night, she slept more soundly than she had in years. But on the second night, she was awakened by a strange sound. It was light footsteps, as if someone was slowly walking down the hallway. Kate froze, trying to listen. Maybe it was just the old floorboards creaking? She convinced herself it was, and went back to sleep. The next day, as she explored the house, she noticed that some parts of the floor did indeed creak. This reassured her. But the footsteps continued. Every time she woke up, the sounds would stop, as if whoever was walking froze, sensing they were being watched. A week later, Kate decided to meet her neighbors. She visited several houses, but most people didn't answer their doors. On one street, she noticed an elderly woman sitting on her porch with a cup of tea. "Good afternoon." Kate approached her. "I recently moved into the house at the end of the street and thought I'd introduce myself." The woman looked up at her, and her expression became strange. "Which house did you move into?" she asked quietly. "The one with the green shutters. It's very beautiful, though it needs some repairs." The neighbor frowned. "You live there?" she said, almost in disbelief. "That house, no one's bought it in years." "Well, I live there now," Kate replied with a smile. The elderly woman averted her eyes, hesitated, and then added, "Be careful, dear. If you hear anything at night, don't try to explain it." Those words stuck with Kate. She tried to push the strange feeling aside, but the sounds at night grew louder. Now, they came not only from the hallway but from neighboring rooms as well. One night, getting up to check, she found barefoot footprints on the dusty floor leading from her bedroom door to the stairs. "That's impossible," she thought. All the doors and windows had been locked. The next day, while cleaning the attic, she found a box containing belongings from the previous owners. Inside were old photographs, yellowed letters, and a faded children's toy. One of the photographs showed a family, a man, a woman, and 2 children. On the back, it read, "Christmas 1958. With love, the Hanson family." Kate decided to research these people in the town archive. She discovered that the Hanson family had lived in the house more than 50 years ago. But one detail shocked her. In 1960, the entire family had disappeared without a trace. The house was sealed for several years before being put up for sale again. On her way home, Kate encountered the elderly neighbor again. She couldn't resist asking, "Do you know anything about the family that lived in my house before me?" The woman frowned and, glancing around, said quietly, "The Hansons were good people. But their house, it's strange. When they disappeared, no one could figure it out. The police searched the house but found nothing. And then people started saying their voices could still be heard at night." That night, Kate heard the footsteps again. This time, she made up her mind. Grabbing a flashlight, she followed the sound. The steps led her to the kitchen. The lights flickered, as if something was disrupting the electricity. Suddenly, she heard a child's laughter. "Who's there?" Kate whispered. A whisper replied, "This is our home." Kate ran out of the kitchen and locked herself in her bedroom, but the words echoed in her mind. They never left. The next morning, Kate decided to leave, but her car wouldn't start. Her phone also wouldn't work. She resolved to stay one more night and ask the neighbors for help in the morning. When darkness fell, the sounds returned, but this time it was different. Through her sleep, she heard someone calling her name. The voice sounded distant at first but grew closer with each passing moment. Kate opened her eyes to see her bedroom door slightly ajar. Standing in the doorway was the woman from the old photograph. She was pale, with empty black eyes. "You shouldn't have come here," she said. The room filled with cold, and behind the woman, Kate saw two small figures. They were children. The next morning, the elderly neighbor stopped by Kate's house. She noticed that the windows were drawn, but the lights were still on inside. She knocked, but no one answered. A few days later, the house was empty again, just as it had been decades ago. No one ever saw Kate again, but the strange noises in the house grew even louder. Emily had always dreamed of owning her own home. After years of working in the city, she finally saved enough to buy a small but cozy cottage on the outskirts of town. The house was old, with worn-out furniture and creaky floors, but its charm made it irresistible. The seller, an elderly man, was kind and accommodating. He showed her every room in the house, including a spacious bedroom on the second floor. But one door at the end of the hallway, he skipped entirely. "What's behind this door?" Emily asked, noticing his hesitation. "Oh, just a storage closet," he replied with a forced smile. "You won't need it." Emily didn't think much of it. After closing the deal, she moved in with great excitement, ready to start a new chapter of her life. The first few days were perfect. She decorated the walls, organized her books, and enjoyed the peace of her new home. But at night, the atmosphere changed. On her first night, she was awakened by a strange noise. It was a faint tapping, like someone drumming their fingers on the walls. She chalked it up to old pipes or the wind and went back to sleep. But the noise returned every night, always after dark. By the third night, she couldn't ignore it anymore. Determined to find the source, she got out of bed and followed the sound. It led her to the door at the end of the hallway, the one the seller had avoided. She stood in front of it, her heart pounding. The tapping stopped abruptly. Holding her breath, she reached for the doorknob and turned it. The door was locked. The next day, Emily searched the house for the key. She eventually found an old keyring in a drawer on the first floor. One of the keys fit perfectly into the lock. Standing before the door, she hesitated but couldn't resist her curiosity. Behind the door was a narrow staircase leading downward. It was odd. There had been no mention of a basement in the house's description. The stairs creaked under her weight as she descended, her flashlight casting long shadows on the dusty walls. Deep gouges ran along the walls, as if someone had desperately clawed at them. At the bottom of the stairs stood a massive wooden wardrobe. It was ornate, with intricate carvings on its doors, and looked completely out of place in the grim, musty basement. A chill ran down Emily's spine, but she stepped closer. The wardrobe doors were slightly ajar. Inside, she found old clothes that smelled of mildew, and on one of the shelves was a photo album. She picked it up cautiously and flipped through it. The photos showed people, families, couples, children. But on every photo, the faces were blurred, as if someone had intentionally erased them. Suddenly, Emily felt a cold touch on her shoulder. She spun around, but no one was there. Panic surged through her, and she dropped the album, bolting up the stairs and locking the door behind her. That night, the noises grew louder. They weren't just tapping anymore, but shuffling footsteps and faint whispers. At one point, she heard her name being called. "Emily," a voice murmured, distant yet distinct. She pulled the blanket over her head, trying to drown it out, but the voice repeated her name, growing louder. Eventually, it sounded like it was right outside her bedroom door. The next morning, she decided to hire a contractor to inspect the house. The man checked the pipes, walls, and wiring but found nothing unusual. When she mentioned the basement, he frowned. "Basement? There's no basement in this house," he said. "What are you talking about?" Emily replied, confused. "I've been down there myself." The contractor shook his head. "This house is built on a concrete slab. There's nothing underneath." Dumbfounded, Emily led him to the mysterious door. But when she opened it, there was no staircase, just a smooth, solid wall. Her hands trembled as she tried to make sense of it. Was it a dream? A hallucination? But then, she saw the photo album sitting on her kitchen table, the same one she had left on the basement floor. That night, the sounds escalated. It wasn't just whispers anymore. It was footsteps stomping down the hallway and someone banging on her bedroom door. Emily froze in terror as the door slowly creaked open. Standing in the doorway was a shadowy figure, pitch black except for its glowing white eyes. It didn't move, but Emily felt its gaze pierce through her. She let out a strangled scream before everything went dark. The next morning, neighbors noticed that Emily's windows were open and her front door was ajar. When they knocked, no one answered. Days passed, but she was never seen again. The house went back on the market, and the door at the end of the hallway was once again locked, hiding its secret. The decision to move to a small, secluded house on the outskirts of town felt like a breath of fresh air for Lily. The quiet streets and the surrounding woods promised a respite from the chaos of her former life. The house itself was modest but charming, a single-story building with whitewashed walls and a red roof, surrounded by a small garden overtaken by wildflowers. When she first stepped inside, she was greeted by the smell of old wood and the faint mustiness of a place left unused for too long. The floors creaked under her feet as she explored, but Lily didn't mind. It gave the house character, she thought. The real estate agent, a brisk woman in her late 50s, had been vague about the house's history. "It's been empty for a while," she had said, brushing off Lily's questions about the previous owner. "It's a solid structure, though. Just needs a little love." Lily was too eager to start anew to probe further. She signed the papers, moved in, and began settling into her new life. For the first few days, everything was perfect. She loved waking up to the sound of birds chirping outside her window and the peaceful solitude of her surroundings. The creaking floorboards became a familiar sound, part of the house's charm. But by the end of the week, she started noticing something odd. The creaking didn't always align with her movements. Sometimes it sounded like footsteps, soft, deliberate steps, echoing through the house when she was still. At first, she dismissed it as the natural groans of an old house settling, but the more she listened, the more unsettling it became. One night, while reading in bed, she heard the creaking again. It started in the living room, a steady rhythm of footsteps crossing the floor. Her heart raced as the sound moved down the hallway, closer to her bedroom. She held her breath, straining to hear, but the noise stopped just outside her door. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling. There was no response, only silence. Summoning her courage, Lily grabbed a flashlight and opened the door. The hallway was empty, the wooden floor stretching out in both directions. She swept the light across the space but found nothing unusual. Shaking her head, she muttered, "It's just the house," and returned to bed, though sleep didn't come easily. The following days brought more incidents. Objects seemed to shift positions when she wasn't looking. A book she'd left on the coffee table appeared on the kitchen counter. The curtains in the living room, which she always left open, were drawn shut when she returned from errands. One afternoon, determined to put her unease to rest, Lily decided to inspect the house more thoroughly. In the corner of the living room, she discovered a hatch in the floor partially hidden beneath an old rug. She hadn't noticed it before. With some effort, she pried it open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. A cold draft wafted up, carrying the faint scent of damp earth. Taking a deep breath, Lily grabbed a flashlight and ventured down the stairs. The wooden steps creaked loudly under her weight, the sound echoing in the confined space. At the bottom, she found a small cellar lined with stone walls. It was mostly empty, save for a few broken chairs and a wooden crate. Inside the crate were old photographs and handwritten letters. The pictures showed a family, a man, a woman, and a young boy. They seemed happy, but as Lily flipped through the photos, she noticed something strange. In each picture, the boy's face was partially obscured, either by shadows or a blur, as though he didn't belong in the image. The letters were no less disturbing. They spoke of strange noises, unexplained movements, and an oppressive presence that seemed to linger in the house. One letter, written in a shaky hand, read, "We tried to leave, but it won't let us. It's in the floor. Always watching, always waiting. God help us." Lily's stomach churned. She shoved the letters back into the crate and hurried upstairs, slamming the hatch shut behind her. That night, the creaking was worse than ever. It started in the living room and moved through the house, pacing back and forth. At times, it seemed to come from directly beneath her, as if someone, or something, was walking inside the floorboards. Unable to take it any longer, Lily decided to confront whatever was haunting her home. Armed with her flashlight and a heavy wrench, she returned to the living room and opened the hatch. The cellar was just as she had left it, silent and empty. But as she turned to leave, she heard it, a faint, muffled creak coming from the far wall. She approached cautiously, her flashlight trembling in her hand. At first, she saw nothing unusual, but then she noticed a small gap in the stonework, just wide enough to fit her fingers. Bracing herself, she pulled at the loose stones, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a child's shoe, old and worn, covered in dust. Next to it was a faded drawing, a crude depiction of a house with dark, scribbled figures standing in the windows. As she stared at the drawing, a chill ran down her spine. She felt a presence behind her, a cold breath on the back of her neck. Whipping around, she shone her flashlight into the darkness, but there was nothing there. The next morning, Lily decided she couldn't stay in the house any longer. She packed her belongings and called the real estate agent, demanding to know the truth about the property. After some hesitation, the woman admitted that the previous family had left under mysterious circumstances. They said the house was strange, she confessed, but no one's ever been hurt. Lily didn't wait to hear more. She left that afternoon, vowing never to return. Months later, the house was sold again, this time to a young couple eager for a fresh start. They, too, would soon hear the creaking footsteps in the dead of night, and the strange sounds coming from beneath the floor. The house waited, patient and unyielding, for its next occupants.